Welcome to another episode of Visions and Voices. I'm your host, John Stewart, partner here at Armanino. With me today is an esteemed colleague of mine and someone who I absolutely enjoy doing work with, Mr. Mark Knight. Thank you for joining the podcast today. Please introduce yourself to everyone out there in listening land.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, John. So my name's Mark Knight. I'm a partner in Armanino's cybersecurity and data privacy practice. I sit in Austin, Texas, but our team kind of is spread out across the nation. Our cyber practice, we work with companies across a wide ranging of industries, but particularly with family offices and trying to help them through the unique needs that they have to protect themselves and their wealth owners' data and systems.
Yeah, I mean, it's a much needed service right now for a lot of people, particularly in the family office segment. So thank you for joining me here today, because it's something you and I have talked about this before. We've been on panels together. We've spoken to family office execs together, and that's where this idea came from, right? I was like, hey, why don't we get this word out to more, because I feel like more need to hear it. And I know you're on the front line and you see this. So let's dive in. I've got a whole list of questions for you, buddy. I'm just going to we're going to go right through them, okay? We're going to pepper you hard, but I know you got this. So can you start by giving our listeners a sense of, current cybersecurity landscape? Like, what are the biggest threats you would say that are facing family offices today? Let's start there.
Let's just get the big picture out of the way first. So the cybersecurity kind of risks that exists, you can start with the nation state actors. So you've got Russia, North Korea, China, and a lot of other countries where
the typical three, right?
there are, we assume government funded cyber criminals that are out there, and they have a wide variety of goals, and we don't have to worry as much about the goals as much as the outcomes, but these are the most sophisticated of the cyber kind of criminals. There's sort of this assumption that if you're directly targeted by one, you're dealing with a team of hundreds or thousands of developers.
Is that true? Is that what they actually
do? Unfortunately, yes.
Oh, it
hundreds
is.
or thousands of
Okay.
developers focusing on your organization.
Okay.
Kind of the nation state side. The next kind of tier is the sort of lone wolf actors started to conglomerate into what are kind of called cyber gangs. Typically, they collude around these ransomware tools. So you might have heard of ransomware. Someone's going in and locking down files on your computer. They're maybe extorting someone when they get sensitive information and saying, pay us or else we'll disclose.
Like denial of service claims, right? They shut down websites and such like that, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, all these different categories. These are kind of people that get together on the dark web. They decide to work as a group to do something. So someone develops.
I'm so glad there's teamwork involved. That's so.
Thank goodness. Yeah. Someone develops a tool, and then to become a part of that gang, you essentially start using that tool. And there's some honor among thieves because they want to have some level of trust among the people that they're holding ransom, so that they will make those payments, they can receive them, they give them the codes to decrypt their data, or they don't disclose it, and they move on. It's not 100%. There's good data on different actors in different countries and different locations. People spend a lot of time doing research on that. So that's where most of the cyber crime that we interact with on a day-to-day basis, that's what we think of is those ransomware gangs. There's another category, which is people that are doing, if you're on your phone and you get random text messages saying like, hey, we have a job that we think you might want to apply.
Yeah, I haven't heard from you in a while, or and you're like, just because you don't know me.
Random, unexpected.
Right.
Those are kind of just your general fraud. It might it's often lumped in with cybercrime because it has cyber components to it.
Right, it's coming through your digital device. So
right, and they're looking for sensitive information or for you to just make direct payments to them in some way, shape, or form. When you're doing cyber education with a team, you really want them to understand all of these different categories. But the things that we interact with the most and the way that people get into the systems are typically through those more ransomware type.
So tier 2 is kind of the most common if we're talking about those three, right?
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. And so when we're talking about that threat landscape, a question that often comes up is, where's the government in this? What's happening in the
I think you've gotten that question every time we've presented this.
Yeah. Exactly. What's happening in the greater world? The US government and the different agencies, they do a lot of things behind the scenes that we don't know about, right? You might hear about it, they tend to focus on, one, interacting with those nation state actors and trying to prevent them from doing things, identifying what they're doing. That's where we find out the least information. The next
Hmm.
thing they try and do is go after whole cyber gangs and shut down ransomware tools and payment processes. They're going
Right.
after the digital wallets where they store their Bitcoin and get these ransom payments. They're going
Makes
after
sense.
wherever they're located, whatever country it might be. They might be following Interpol and seeing when these people show up in different countries where they have extradition treaties in place. That's the role of the government. It's happening often behind the scenes. I think that the harsh reality of it is, as an individual or as a single organization, if you run into a ransomware attack or a cyber crime, you make a payment that you shouldn't have made from your bank to
Right.
someone, you're kind of out of luck, at least when the government is concerned.
Well,
You
because that's
can
kind of
report
my
it.
follow-up question. Like many family offices will assume they're not big enough targets versus like corporations, and I know that's going to get a lot more headlines. Is that a true assumption though?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Corporations are getting more sophisticated in the quality of protections that they put in place. And
Right.
so, more and more so, smaller organizations, nonprofits, individuals are becoming bigger and bigger
So they are
targets.
targeting that level now, and
It,
because they're not as sophisticated, and they don't have as many resources maybe to stop it. So
that's exactly right. They're
yeah.
often the lowest hanging fruit, unfortunately, because they don't have the same type of resources to protect their systems. And the way that the threat actors identify their targets is often through kind of general reconnaissance. So they
Right.
come in through general phishing emails, right? You receive an email. Those are automated frequently. Now they can be targeted, and that's
Right.
kind of the role that often is playing these days is AI has made it a lot easier for someone sitting in another country to make a believable phishing email come to you and say, hey, I
Right.
urgently need you to process this payment, or make a believable looking invoice that they try and trick someone into paying. The trick with family offices is it's a much more interesting target for a threat actor, and there's a lot more open source intelligence. OSINT is the term that we use in the industry, but open source intelligence, someone can do a lot of research on your organization as a whole and the
Right.
wealth owner and identify a lot of core information because of the interest that there might be in the news,
Right.
in the things that you put out.
Typically, the bigger, the wealthier they are, let's say, the more prominent that name is, it's going to be easier to find out who they are and stuff. Right.
That's exactly right. And so then they're going to spend potentially some targeted time. And the last thing you want is someone spending targeted time on you
That's
as an
even worse.
individual or an
Right. No,
organization.
I don't, nobody wants that. So
You don't
is
want that
that,
kind of attention.
so are those accidentally sending a payment when you shouldn't, responding to that crazy text message is not for you? Like, are those the most common cybersecurity mistakes that you see wealthy families making, or is it other things too? Like, what else would you put in that bucket?
Those are definitely high on the list. Clicking the wrong link on an email,
Yeah, don't click the links. Don't click the links. Come
exactly.
on.
Responding to a text, responding to a phone call that's
Yeah.
questionable. Those are frequent attacks. But I think even more so, a lot of family offices run into issues because of the vendors that they choose to work with. And so they
Okay.
might be
Tell me more about
using,
that because that's interesting. So vendor selection plays a part in this.
yeah, absolutely. So
Okay.
the types of tools that are available to manage your wealth, to manage a home, whatever it might be, each of those kind of fall into different tiers on the level of security that an organization has in place.
Okay.
And you might have a small user base. You want one or two licenses for the family office to use this tool. And therefore, the types of organizations that you're typically pushed towards are
Yeah.
the smaller ones that don't have the type of strong cybersecurity tools in place. They don't have third parties coming in and doing audits of them to make sure that they've secured their systems.
Right. That's
That's
something a
really
larger
risky.
corporation would do, but maybe family offices. Well, in some regard, would you say this is true? Right? Like, and it's a bit of a tangent, and I just want to quickly, and we'll
Sure.
come back to the main track here, but that feels like an assumption, a false assumption too. Like family offices can actually afford to do some of that now.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It's just kind of what we've seen in the recon that we've done with some family offices, we'll find older, outdated, smaller tools that are in place. And that's often the areas where we see the most vulnerabilities. And
Yeah.
sometimes those are the paths that we see that people have used when we're coming in after the fact and there has already been a breach. We find that it's kind of antiquated technology or a small
Mhm.
provider that was used as a way in the door, essentially, to those
Right.
family offices. So
So
I think
being
if
on
you ask
top
the
of your tech
question,
stack with well-proven larger vendors, best in breed, that's going to get you around a lot of this, I would assume.
that's absolutely right.
Okay.
And if you ask the question after the fact, most people will say, yeah, we think it's worth spending the money on it. But
Right.
when it comes to the budget
Up front. Right.
and something that's been in place for 10 years, people aren't sitting down and doing a review of everything that's in place and saying, is this still the right tool? Is this still the right company for us based on our public footprint, based on how widely we're managing our investments and any other factors that go into what data you have and how it needs to be protected.
So that's a good point. So let's talk about protecting, right? So, we've talked about all the things that can go wrong and all the haywire things to look for, right? Which is true. That's the fear part of this, and I get it. Now let's talk about the protection. What can they do? So, what are the most effective ways for families to protect their digital assets? Like, start there, let's say.
Yeah, wide variety. It really needs to start with knowing what you have, doing a risk assessment and an inventory. What are all of the different types of systems and technology that you have, not only at the family office, but even at the home, at the private residences, at the offices
I
that
was going to
you're
say all their
responsible for
personal
managing.
devices, home networks. And is this like an effort leading you here? Because I know the answer, but I want our audience to know. Like, are you describing an effort here that's like 6 months, a year, or is it like, hey, we come in and we do this really quickly?
Yeah, this can be 1 to 2 weeks. It doesn't
There you
have
go.
to be this long, extended effort.
Right.
There's obviously layers to this, but the basics are often not fully in place. And our first year working with family offices, usually identifying the 10 to 15 key areas that
Yeah.
they really should be considering it as an organization, doing a little bit of testing to validate whether there are current vulnerabilities in
Because you'll
place
do
on
pen
the
testing and everything else to see where are the vulnerabilities, right? Essentially,
right.
that's what
So
you're doing. Yeah.
a pen test says, hey, have our team of ethical hackers try and break into
The white hat, if
something.
you will. Yeah.
The white hat hackers
See,
try
I
and
know a
break
little bit
in.
of hacker talk. That's about all I got. But yeah, okay,
There
go
you
ahead.
go. That's perfect. See what they can find, what vulnerabilities exist. Let's get those fixed. The other side, the risk assessment side, is how do we prevent that from happening again? How do we
Right.
make sure that we have the right tools, processes, procedures, and people in place? And often, and most importantly, with these smaller family offices, vendors in place to protect our things going forward.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So, many family offices are multi-generational. Also in a moment where, boomers are starting to retire en masse, right? And that's going to continue for several more years, obviously, which means Zennials, millennials, whatever you want to call them, they're all coming in and they're taking over a lot of that wealth. And it's be exponential, right? You may go from one wealth owner who's a boomer and maybe they had four kids, and now you got four, right? And so if you're doing this, I would think education might be a good idea here as you're transition. So what would you tell a family office that's going through that generational and maybe the upcoming generation is going to be more aware of this, obviously, because they're going to be more digital in nature. How do you educate them? How do you approach them?
Yeah, it has to be education across the board, but it needs to be targeted, like you said, to those generations based on
Okay.
how they're interacting with technology and what the risks may be. I think the table stakes should be that a family office, everyone involved is going through something as simple as phishing training, know before, like they need the basics.
Right.
But what we do when we come in and work with an organization is understand what do we need to do to get to that next level? And so potentially with the older generation, it's more education around the advancements in AI technology and in phishing attempts and in uh, altering and
Yeah, it's
video
getting really hard to
altering.
figure this out though, right? I mean, and that's got to be feedback you hear all the time. This is getting harder.
Yeah, it's deeply challenging. And so it's The good news is we can always go back to the basics, which is a good controlled process says
Okay.
anytime we're making a large disbursement, whether it's from an individual or from our team, we need to have multiple people involved in that process. The more people we involve, the harder it is for these threat actors, for these hackers to cause us to go out and do
Yeah,
something.
you're
Now,
avoiding the single point of failure, right? So now,
exactly. We need
right,
to
that makes
remove
sense.
as many single points of failure as possible.
Right.
That's why part of that education process gets down into the weeds. A lot of people have one email address and they use that for everything, right?
Right.
Best practice, especially if you have a large, bank account or a crypto wallet, we need separate email IDs for those different systems
You're right. That
because
makes it harder because they can't attach them all together, so they don't
yeah,
know.
if you're John Stewart at gmail.com,
Well, don't
the
tell
threat
everyone
actor's
though.
gonna,
That's not my
yeah,
email. Yeah, go
exactly.
ahead.
Now everyone knows. They're gonna
That's
start
not
putting
it.
that into all these banking websites and crypto wallets and all those other things and trying to break in. They're gonna look on the dark web where people post lists of breached credentials and they're gonna
Right.
search for those credentials in other systems. So if you use one password here, did you use that password somewhere else? One of the best ways to get around that is making sure that you have multiple email addresses and different
And
passwords
different
for all those
passwords.
systems.
Yeah. And
And
we're
this
all
is a
guilty
good
of not
time,
always following that, but yeah, I get it.
exactly. And this
Yeah.
is a good time to talk about how a family office can manage something like that.
Yeah.
So password manager tools, those are, again, table stakes.
I was gonna
Everyone
say that's
should
just they've been
have,
out for a long time. If you're not using one, I gotta ask why, right? Like
yeah,
it's they're
it's what
nominal in
it's a
cost.
nominal cost.
Yeah.
It's set up in a way that a lot of people can interact with them. You can set to where only certain individuals have access to certain credentials. That is the bare minimum. The next thing that we really need to understand is username and password authentication is not sufficient for really sensitive systems. And so
Yeah, it's
using
not. It's
centralized
easy to get
authentication,
around, quite frankly. It's
yeah,
easy.
exactly. Using centralized authentication tools like an Okta or an Azure AD, there are a million others out there. That's one part of it so that you
Okay.
have secure ways of logging in.
So an
The
ox is
next
a
part,
step up.
exactly. And the next
Got it.
part is understanding what is your multi-factor that you have in place. So
Right.
a lot of us are used to, I log in with my user ID and password, I receive a text message by SMS to my phone, I type in
Right.
that code. That's the easiest thing for someone to circumvent because with SIM swapping, the person that's earning minimum wage at the Verizon store, someone can go in and convince them to change your phone number to
I'm guessing that
them.
actually happens since you're calling that out. That's
Unfortunately, it
wow.
happens a lot,
Wow.
and so
Okay. Good
that
to know.
that is a risk, and that's why SMS factor authentication is really falling out of favor. And
That makes sense now why Google and others are seeing them change to, hey, open up this app on this other device you have. And I'm like, why are you doing
exactly,
this
so
all of a sudden? And that's why.
yeah, app-based authenticators are great. There are hard, physical USB keys from YubiKey and others that, especially when you're talking about crypto wallets and things that are, hey, I've got potentially millions of dollars sitting on one device. Within one account. That's really where you want to add these additional layers of
Yeah,
security
that
that
would seem
go
to be pretty
above and beyond.
sensitive, right? Like you don't want them getting there. So
Yeah. I mean, there was a multi-billion dollar theft that just occurred where it was a exchange. And although the exchange had their data stored on a cold wallet, it wasn't on a website, a very sophisticated hacker, it turned out to be North Korea, they came up with ways of tricking them into going onto those cold wallets and sending a payment that looked like a few dollars that was actually their entire wallet. So it just shows how complicated it had to be for them to get access to that. So at least make it that complicated so it would take an entire nation state to try and get at your wallet.
right, that's a good level up. That's going to
Yeah,
eliminate a lot of other people trying to get
it
to you. Yeah.
it's definitely scary knowing that they were able to do that and the way that they
Right.
did it, but you also learned that it took a very high level of sophistication. And if you at least protect yourself to that level, you know how hard it would be for someone to get there and do the same sort of thing.
Again, another sidebar here. Are there insurance policies people should have to help with this?
Yeah, cyber insurance is really important.
Okay.
Often in the family office world, the concept of self-insurance makes a lot of sense.
Right.
The cyber insurance providers and policies that are out there, there are really two elements to it. One is just the dollar amount that's being protected. That's often not the most important element.
Okay.
To me, the most important element is that cyber insurance carriers, they're going to do a couple of things. And look, I don't sell cyber insurance. I don't
Yeah, I
have
know we don't do it.
a
I'm just
skin in
curious
this
to
game,
know, like,
but
it sounds like a good thing if you need to.
yeah, it's something we recommend to all organizations, regardless of size, because of the resources that they have at hand. They're going to sit down with you in the underwriting process and do some kind of risk assessment. It is not nearly as thorough as it probably should be and what you should do as an organization in total, but it's at least a baseline to understand what the risk profile is. But then they're going to have access to
Right.
individuals wherever you may be that will come in if an incident does occur and help you with the negotiation. If there's sensitive data that you need to restore, or if there's sensitive data that they're threatening to release, going to help you with the process of going through your incident response and getting your systems back up and running.
I remember something you've always told me, Mark, is don't think calling the FBI is going to do anything. So,
Exactly. So I said earlier, the FBI, they have their hands. And while you might be able to report to them that something happened, they're not going to be able to step in and help you. Your bank is not going to step in and help you.
right. So these insurance
Your
providers are kind of one of those resources you can bring in that can. Okay.
Yeah, and they may not be able to cover the entire loss, but they are going to usually be a strong helper in putting you in touch with the right resources to
Okay.
go through the recovery and restoration process.
That's awesome. So then, I mean, we're talking families here too. So, we talked about generational handoff, but let's talk even younger because, kids are online, right? And they're all got these devices. We have kids, right? We know they're all on their devices. So young family members in these family offices, I assume they're going to face the same issues, but they're going to be so young they may not realize what they're doing. Like, how do families protect basically their children, their
Yeah.
minors from being attacked as well?
Yeah, especially important for wealth owners, but really just good advice for everyone. If you look at your home network, it might
Hmm.
make sense to segment your network so that your kids and your kids' devices are on one part of the network. Your Internet of Things devices, your smart fridge and your Wi-Fi and all those other
Doorbell and
things.
your door lock and whatever it
Exactly.
is.
They
Yeah.
need to be on a separate segment. And then maybe,
Okay.
you as the more
I got to write this
sophisticated
down. This is
user,
good for me to do, but yeah, keep going.
you have your own segment. And that is one layer of protection. Another, especially when you're talking about kids, there are a lot of different tiers of how you can work with kids and have third-party tools that assist in the monitoring. There are companies like Bark that are out there that have specific devices or
Okay.
monitoring tools for looking at what your kids are doing on social media, on text messaging, looking for self-harm, bullying, threats. There are a
Okay.
lot of good tools out there for everyone. It's, I think, even more important when there's a nest egg behind this that you're interested in protecting. Education really is the key, though. There has to be a conversation, and bringing in someone to facilitate that conversation is really helpful, especially when you're talking about the importance of having separate devices, separate accounts for different things. When you
Right.
start giving the kids access to more and more money, more and more
Goes
take over
up.
the business, they need to
Yeah.
understand the differences in what they're taking over. And there's often just this attitude of, this is my personal wealth and it's associated with my personal social media, personal accounts, treating the family office as a business, treating it in a different light. That's not often the mindset. And that's something
Right.
that we would want to instill up front through education with those, whatever the age may be.
That makes sense. I mean, it's great advice. You're right for anybody to follow, but definitely for high net worth families that want to make sure that they're not target or don't get taken. So, okay, let's keep going through this process here. We've now talked about first was all the fear. Now it was about, okay, how do you protect? Now let's go into response and crisis management if something does happen. Let's say you had all those protections in place, but they still got through somehow. You got taken. So let's say family office gets hacked. What should their immediate response be?
Ideally, again, you have a insurance carrier that you can call.
Right.
A great place to start. If there's something that looks like a hack, it probably is. If you're not able to get to certain files, if you have a ransomware attack, this is what typically happens. Something pops up on your screen and it says, "Hey, we've locked down your files. If you want to get access, send X number of Bitcoin to this location. You don't do that yourself. That's where you need to call someone in to walk you through the process.
Got it.
The responder, what they're going to do is they're going to look at one, first and foremost, is there a way for us to restore this data without paying that ransom? So
Of course.
ideally you have cold backups of the data or something else, but maybe say they've gotten to sensitive information and it's something you don't want to have disclosed. So even if
Okay.
you're able to restore it, you're still negotiating to prevent them from putting it out in the public. That negotiation needs to be informed by the basically the legal teams at those insurance carriers, people that they're going to bring in to work with you. They're going to look at the reputation of the person who's making the demand. Based on that reputation, they're going to negotiate the payment. They're going to have a structured process for making that payment. They're going to report to the FBI for you, this type of thing.
Right.
There are financial implications, there are tax implications of these types of events. And so going through that process in a structured way is really important. What they need to go in and do is one, first identify how did they get in, where are they?
Right.
That identification process then informs how do we eradicate them from the system. We
Yeah, because
don't want
there's
to go
one step to remove the immediate threat. The second one is then you got to plug the holes. You don't want them
yeah,
getting again.
yeah, you have to prevent it from happening again, because unfortunately what a lot of people will do is they'll see files locked down, they'll restore them from backup. The threat actor just goes right back
Yeah,
in,
they're
locks
just
them
in
down
there
again,
again. So like, what,
and
guys?
exactly. So unless you're confident that you've kept them from whatever door they came in through, you you don't want to go through the restoration process. Once you've restored, you've figured out, is there a payment that needs to be made? There's a lot of notification potential that needs to be made. Now, hopefully you're not holding personal information that's sensitive about your team members, but maybe there's a little bit of that. There might be state reporting that needs to be done. But then finally, once all of it's done, you really need to go back and look at the root cause. How did this happen and how can we prevent it from
Right.
happening
Typical
again?
root cause analysis, like you would do for anything else that, even if it built a product and it failed, you do root cause analysis. This is no different.
Exactly. That postmortem is really important in that process.
So you had mentioned before, like an incident response plan, and you can help clients create that. So what would be, let's tell the audience, what are some of those key components you would say of a strong incident response plan? Like, where do you start?
First and foremost, it needs to be written down. A lot of people have the idea of how they would handle a crisis, how they would go through an incident response, but it's not actually formalized. So actually using a structured plan to create an incident response policy, program, plan, having it written down, stored, going through the education, that is really important. What goes into that? You really need to identify who is involved. Who are you going to call, right? Who is
Right.
your insurance provider? Who are your IT vendors? Who are all of your third parties,
And have
your
all that
software
organized
providers?
that's not somewhere in your file structure so you can actually access
You
it.
can
And
get to it.
right.
People will print out physical copies of this.
I can see why you would, because if they're gonna lock down all your files, you need to get to it, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And then a good incident response plan, it's going to have those components that I talked about earlier. It's going to identify what it is. It's going to talk about how to contain the issues. It's going to
Hmm.
talk about how to eradicate and then how to recover. So how do you
Okay.
get everything back up? And then finally, it's going to have a process for conducting a post-incident review. I think the most important thing is don't try and create this from scratch. Use tools that exist. NIST, as a government agency, they put out a great guide on how to structure an incident response
Okay. So
plan.
some of this you can go
Might
out
not,
and find.
yeah, it might not be something you want to tackle yourself, but at least know that you're using a structured plan to create something like that.
Okay.
And then don't just stop with creating the plan. The next thing is educating your team. Walk them through what's in this, how it will work. And then most importantly, do a tabletop exercise. Actually go through the plan. What is the process?
What
Yeah,
to
doing a
do.
dry
Okay.
run,
That's cool.
interacting with your vendors, interacting with your communications folks, whoever it might be, making sure that everyone knows what their role is in the case that an incident does occur, so that if and when it does, they're all ready and they're not going back saying, what did we say we were going to
Yeah,
do?
because like you said earlier, like if it's been 10 years since you've looked at some of this or put systems in, you're way behind already.
Yeah.
So like don't
And
let
that
it go that long. Yeah.
that's always a risk is you create these plans, you come up with a great process, and it was 10 years ago and it hasn't been updated. And now you have implemented 10 new tools and you have, 5 different investment accounts and you
Right.
have
And
a
your
new
information's
charitable
out of date. And
foundation.
now you're scrambling to figure out where to start and who to talk to because you didn't keep it up to date.
That's exactly right.
Oh, that's fun for everybody. Okay. So let's keep talking future trends, emerging trends. You mentioned how AI, and let's include in there deep fake tech too, because that's not always AI based, but I think we lump it in the same bucket, right? You said that's changing the cyber threat landscape. Can you go add on a little more there? And then I have a couple follow-ups for you too.
Yeah, so these AI tools, how they get used in these is if they have access to a person video, us talking here,
Right.
unfortunately,
Oh,
that could be
fun.
enough to train an agent to impersonate me, especially the voice. The voice part is really strong. The video part's not quite as strong, but it's still believable. There are some really famous
You're making me think we should
instances.
stop doing podcasts, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's where we'll talk about how to prevent this or at least get ready
Okay,
for
okay, good. Yeah, walk
it
me through how
next.
we do that. Okay,
But
good.
so the tools allow those things. The way that you get around it, first and foremost, is the education piece. Just being aware that that exists is really strong information, especially when you talk about the generational gap. People that aren't in the news on top of technology may not understand that it's really easy to fake someone's voice and call someone up saying, hey, I'm stuck in another country, or I just got in a terrible accident and I need you to send money. One that should raise red flags, but it's only going to do that if you're aware that it could happen.
Right.
So that education is really important. So then
Okay.
what do? First thing you do, hang up and call back. That is a really strong way. It's very easy for a threat actor. I mean, my team, we do this when we do phishing exercises. We
Okay.
impersonate the phone number. So it makes it look like you're getting called by,
I have seen
your
this.
son, your daughter, whatever
Yeah,
it might be.
there are threat actors out there that do this. I've seen this. Yeah.
It's unfortunately very easy to do.
Yeah.
The carriers,
But I did what you
AT&Ts and
said. I had Mark
Verizons,
Knight in my head and I hung up. I went to Google and I looked up the agency they said they were from, and it was a completely different person and a completely
yeah,
different phone number. And guess what? I never heard from them again.
that's exactly right. It can even be
Yeah,
a person. They can impersonate a direct phone number.
yeah, they
So
attempted to. Yeah.
when they do that, it doesn't actually mean that they have their phone necessarily. They haven't like done a SIM swap. That's still a possibility, but it's a little bit harder. That is step one. Step two is verify, right? There's got to be, it's almost like sharing a code word. There's got to be a process that you use for helping someone in an emergency, sending money. Put multiple steps in that process so that someone with fresh eyes and fresh ears can go in and say, how confident are we that this is real? How do we verify that it's real? And if it actually is real and we do need to do this, we need to help someone out.
Mhm.
How are we going to send them, whether it's money or help, in a way that makes a lot of sense, right?
Yep.
Them gift cards, sending them crypto, usually not the answer. Even direct
Right.
payments, cash, is that really what they need? And how can we validate that with a third party that we trust? That's
Yeah.
the key. It's the education. Unfortunately, there are stories of cybersecurity experts that their family falling for these voice phishing
I can see how
attempts
it's
and,
easy.
and
Like
others.
I'm talking about a real incident that occurred several months with me, and I'm not gonna go into too much detail with it, but they weren't successful because I have you in my head. I do, Mark, and I was consistently and erratically skeptical,
Yeah.
and I just didn't, and I just would not agree to anything they said, and I had them prove. I was forcing them to prove it, which they couldn't, and that's when you start to feel like, okay, yeah, there's something weird going on here. And then I went right to the internet to go research everything they said they were, and they weren't. And it was really clear at that point.
Yeah. And the amount of research that they do on you is going to increase the believability.
They
But they're
had
really,
some, which is what made it. But then I, again, had you in my head. I was like, I'm going to be really skeptical because this doesn't make sense. Why am I getting a phone call?
they're going to lean into the nature of most people that we want to be helpful. We want
Right.
to help out. We want to provide to someone in need.
Oh, they were trying to
And
scare. Yeah, it was a
they
scare
try and
tactic.
scare
They were
you into
trying to
do it.
fear monger.
Yeah.
And if it hadn't been for honestly the work you and I do together on this, and again, I don't do this. I just watch you and your team do it. I came in very skeptical, and I'm very thankful for that, Mark, because you made me skeptical. So I did
And
not
I think
continue. Yeah.
And again, at a family office, if you don't do anything else, maybe that's one really good takeaway. Education is so important, and you can
Yeah.
do a lot yourself. You don't have to necessarily bring someone in to assist with it. Just making sure that everyone across the organization, regardless of their role, and with the family up and down the chain, they're aware that these things exist. That goes a really long way.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Okay, so there's probably other tech out there that can help this, right? Like one that comes to mind, and I know it gets brought up sometimes in conversations, would be blockchain, right? That is supposed to be something that can protect some of this and make it a little maybe easier to track if they're doing something, but also protect your assets. And it's a bit decentralized, right? So how does
Yep.
that play? Does it play a role in protecting wealth here?
It can.
Okay.
Smart contracts are, I would say, still early, right? So I
Yeah, it
think that
doesn't.
there's
It
going to
feels
be
like
an
we're still
important
early with
role.
this tech, and they haven't really
Yeah,
figured it out. Okay.
there's going to be an important role. I think the reality is that the most common thing that comes up in that realm is the actual protection of cryptocurrencies, using a well-known exchange, maybe using a cold wallet, really diving into all of the protections you have over any digital assets that you might be storing. That is kind of the area where you can do the most as a wealth owner and as the family office advising your wealth owner.
Okay.
Really important to secure those things. As we look at things like smart contracts and others, I think hopefully more and more vendors are going to start using those, putting those transactions on the blockchain, making it more openly known. But unfortunately, as we've seen with cryptocurrencies,
Right.
just because it's on a blockchain, just because there's knowledge of the transaction history, does not mean fraud can't exist there. In
Yeah,
fact,
no, there's
tons of
plenty of
fraud
examples where
exists.
they've been fraudulent transactions through the crypto, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
happen. So yeah, there's ways to still get around that. Okay.
So I think don't see this as a panacea that's going to solve everything immediately. I think it's going to be a tool that companies are going to use over time, and we just need to stay on top of it and understand when does it hit that threshold that it really assists us.
So it's just
Uh,
another potential tool in the toolkit. Keep it there. And if it gets better, okay, maybe we can use more of it. But for now, it's just another factor.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move into kind of summer. I mean, this has been awesome. This is great. It helps me personally, but I'm hoping that I think anybody listening, it's going to help them a lot too. So if a family office, yeah, they're going to have limited resources, even though we're going to say, hey, they're wealthy. I know, but they're doing things with that. So they have limited resources on cybersecurity. What are the top three things they should prioritize? I'm limiting to three here, and I get it because we talked about a lot, but give it your shot here.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost is doing an inventory. What
Okay.
are all of the systems and vendors that you use? You need to understand that both as the family office and how you manage the wealth, as well as with your wealth owners, their families, kids, the relatives, whoever is involved and could have an impact on the security data risk and the wealth. Understand the full environment. What is that inventory of those systems and vendors?
Yeah, know all of your weaknesses, right? Like
Yeah, exactly. You got to know where everything is to know what the weaknesses could be. The
you're right.
next
You got to know
thing,
where it is just to protect it, right? Like if you don't even know you have that, then you're not even looking to protect it, right? Okay, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
the next thing I hope everyone's doing, and if they're not, this is where they should really spend their time, is ensuring that they're using strong multi-factor authentication and password management. Don't allow anyone in your organization to reuse passwords. Make sure that they're stored in a secure way. And most importantly, using those different and new IDs for the most sensitive systems, putting in not SMS-based multi-factor authentication, but
Right. Go to app
app-based or
based. Go to app
key-based.
based. You heard it
Yeah,
here. Yep.
making sure those things are in place. That's kind of the low-hanging fruit that can really up your security game without
Okay.
any investment, really.
Right. You're
And
not even talking about things that are going to cost any
yeah,
money
that
necessarily.
doesn't
You're
have
just
to
saying,
take anything.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's just a best policy practice to put in place. Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, I think once you have that inventory, doing an actual risk assessment,
Okay.
understanding, are we following best practices in the core areas as an organization? Treat yourself like a business because that's what you are.
Right. If I'm running a family office or I am the principal of the family office, I think that's where I'd absolutely want to do that probably on an annual to 1 to 2 year basis, right? Like you just want
Yeah,
to keep it fresh,
absolutely.
right?
And it doesn't have to be that complicated. There are
Okay.
really structured, straightforward frameworks that, my team can come in and within a week provide some really valuable feedback and a roadmap that
And
says,
that's calming to
here's
hear. You're not talking about something that is going to take months of discovery and effort. Everybody's going to have to pay attention. You're going to pull everybody out of the business to do this. That's not what you're saying, right? What you're saying is
exactly.
we can come in and be very efficient and quick for you to get you those answers to provide that security.
Yeah, you don't have to come in with a highly complicated approach.
Okay.
Those things exist. And if you have a large family office or you're really concerned, maybe it's worthwhile. But at a bare minimum, making sure you have the basics in place and that someone's come in and evaluated that and given you feedback, given you a roadmap and said, here's what you should do this year. Here's what you can do next year. Here's
Yeah.
what we should come back and look at the next time we do this, so that you at least have the basics in place. That's really
Now
gonna,
you have a program. You have a plan you can run to as opposed to
yeah,
just thumbing it, figuring out where's the
exactly.
wind going today? Are we going to be okay? Like that's
And
not
I
a
know I gave you three, but I'm going to segue that into that's going to inform how you go and get cyber insurance, because that those two things should go hand in
I
hand,
would
the risk
assume, yeah, that
assessment
makes sense.
and
That's
the
going to be
insurance
part
policy.
of the execution of the plan is, hey, let's
When
look at
they
your
do
insurance
diligence,
policies, right?
they're going to ask about those things.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, this has been great, and I'm sure people will have a ton more questions than I've been able to ask you here today. So, where can our listeners go to learn more about cybersecurity best practices and stay informed outside of, reaching out to you, which I would recommend anybody doing? Just, we can do that. But what else would they want to do? What would you tell them to go do?
Yeah, I think it's in the cybersecurity world, it's really important to stay on top of the news, because
Okay.
new things happen all the time. And what we talk about today as the threats and the vectors and all that, it may be different 6 months from now.
Right.
And so there are great resources, podcasts. If you want to go to the government, CISA, which is our sort of information security
Okay.
administration, they put out great reports on a weekly at least basis that they're deep with information. If you want to go to a third party, Chris Krebs, who actually was the former director of CISA,
Okay.
Krebs on security, he puts out really detailed reports there. But even if you're not deep in this world, sometimes it's fun to understand what's happening, because that can be really informative to what are the threat actors doing, what are the trends that are out there, and it can really push you down the right direction of knowing what's going on and what are the new threats you
The other
need to
thing
be
is we
aware
can
of.
just do this annually, Mark. And so they just listen to our podcast every
There you
year when
go.
you're on, and they're going to get the latest they need to know.
Yes, yes. And hopefully we don't have a million new things a year from now,
Yeah,
but the
that's the
reality
problem.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the number of ransomware attacks year over year, 23 to 24 went up 11%. So it's still double digit growth. It was
Yeah, that's
faster than
not the
that
growth we
before.
want to see.
So
Yeah.
yeah, unfortunately got to such a large number that it's slowing down in percentages, but it's every day. I think it's every 11 seconds, they say. So
11
you have to
seconds.
stay on,
Good
yeah,
Lord.
you have to stay on top of it, because it's not going away. You just
Right.
have to come up with a way of making your organization less appealing. Don't be the easiest target out there. That'll get you a long way. And then being prepared for the inevitability of what to do in case something does
I
happen.
think that's an important note. Like, this isn't going away. This is going to be a constant day in, day out. And that's just the nature of what we're talking about. And so that is why you need to have the inventory of your systems, strong multi-factor authentication, do a risk assessment, because it isn't going away. There's not some magic wand that's going to come in and say, oh, we no longer have to worry about this. That's actually not going to happen.
No, people thought Bitcoin, that having
Right.
cryptocurrency was going to be a way, because the blockchain is going to have all the transactions. Unfortunately, they always find a way around. So whatever fixes we come up with on the good guys' side, the bad guys come up with something new and
Right,
novel.
that's just the
to
nature of
bring
the
in.
game we're playing, and you need to be prepared for it. If you don't know it's like anything else. If you don't know the rules of the game you're playing, you're probably going to lose.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for taking time out to do this. I know every time we do this, whether it's a small audience or here on a podcast, the feedback's always incredibly valuable, right? People love it. So thank you for carving out an hour. You got to go back and go against those threat actors. I don't want to take you out of the good work they're doing, but thank you for joining us here today. This has been a pleasure. For everybody out there, if you have questions, go check out our website. Mark's on there. His team's on there. You can reach out. You can learn more. You can ping us here as well. But Mark, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
Cool.